Okay, so we've been going through this Life of the Buddha and on the section on the doctrine. And in that we've been going through the Third Noble Truth, Nirodha Satya, the truth of cessation of dukkha. And Nirodha is oftentimes used as a synonym for Nibbana, so that I thought to do a reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's introduction to the Majjhima Nikaya, and he is discussing Nibbana, but I think it's because it's synonymous with Nirodha, with cessation of suffering, that I think it's very relevant. The state that supervenes when ignorance and craving have been uprooted is called Nibbana. And no conception in the Buddha's teaching has proved so refractory to conceptual pinning down as this one. In a way, such elusiveness is only to be expected, since Nibbana is described precisely as, quote, profound, hard to see, and hard to understand, unattainable by mere reasoning. Yet in this same passage, and that was from the Majjhima 26, yet in this same passage, the Buddha also says that Nibbana is to be experienced by the wise. And in the suttas, he gives enough indications of its nature to convey some idea of its desirability. The Pali Canon offers sufficient evidence to dispense with the opinion of some interpreters that Nibbana is sheer annihilation. Even the more sophisticated view that Nibbana is merely the destruction of defilements and the extinction of existence cannot stand up under scrutiny. Probably the most compelling testimony against that view is the well-known passage from the Udana that declares, with reference to Nibbana, that, quote, there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, end of quote, the existence of which makes possible, quote, escape from the born, become, made, and conditioned. The Majjhima Nikaya characterizes Nibbana in similar ways. It is, quote, the unborn, unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled, supreme security from bondage, end of quote, which the Buddha attained to on the night of his enlightenment. That's from Majjhima 26. Its preeminent reality is affirmed by the Buddha when he calls Nibbana the supreme foundation of truth, whose nature is undeceptive and which ranks as the supreme noble truth. Majjhima 140. Nibbana cannot be perceived by those who live in lust and hate, but it can be seen with the arising of spiritual vision. And by fixing the mind upon it in the depths of meditation, the disciple can attain the destruction of the taints, the asavas, also variously translated as outflows or corruptions. And that comes up in many places. The Buddha does not devote many words to a philosophical definition of Nibbana. One reason is that Nibbana, being unconditioned, transcendent, and supramundane, does not easily lend itself to definition in terms of concepts that are inescapably tied to the conditioned, manifest, and mundane. Another is that the Buddha's objective is the practical one of leading beings to release from suffering, and thus his principal approach to the characterization of Nibbana is to inspire the incentive to attain it and to show what must be done to accomplish this. To show Nibbana as desirable as the aim of striving, he describes it as the highest bliss, as the supreme state of sublime peace, as the ageless, deathless, and sorrowless, as the supreme security from bondage. to show what must be done to attain Nibbana, to indicate that the goal implies a definite task, he describes it as the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of all acquisitions, the destruction of craving, dispassion. Above all, Nibbana is the cessation of suffering. And for those who seek an end to suffering, such a designation is enough to beckon them towards the path. So that, I thought it was quite a beautiful summary of the nature of Nibbana, nature of Nirodha, and the primacy of cessation of dukkha. And then again, it's sort of cessation of suffering, but it's also a cessation of discontent, dissatisfaction, dis-ease, stress, all of the nuanced aspects of dukkha. So as the third noble truth, it of course it usually begins with a dukkha in various obvious forms, but then as we start practicing, investigating, and we start realizing how nuanced that dukkha actually is, and how desirable that cessation of dukkha is. Any questions on that?
I recall a story. Yeah. I guess somebody had asked Ajahn Mahabua, like what's so good about Nibbana or something along those lines, and his answer is just, as I recall it, it stuck in my mind he says, I think he stopped and looked and said, if I could take Nibbana out and show it to you, you would want nothing else.
Yeah.
Kind of that direct, because sometimes they question how worth is it, it's like it's like practice can seem so difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
But these teachers unequivocally say, look, this is worth it.
This is really worth it. It's of course the most graphic image that the Buddha gives is if you were
if the king sort of said he would take you out and shoot you with 100 arrows in the morning, 100 arrows at noon, 100 arrows in the evening, and if he did that for 100 years, but you would realize these Four Noble Truths, realize liberation, realize Nibbana, it would be worth it. Okay. And this next sutta, of course, is one that most people will probably know, but it's the Kachanagota Sutta. But it's a good to me, it's an excellent illustration of say, like cessation being a balance of view that is experienced as, say, the ending of suffering, and say, as opposed to just a ceasing, an ending, or an extinction, or a kind of an attempt to accomplish that, and then also it wraps it up with the emphasis on the dependent nature of all phenomena, that paticca samuppada and ida paccayata. And that is Samyutta 12, Sutta number 15. At Savatthi. Then the Venerable Kachanagota approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said to him, "Venerable Sir, it is said, right view, right view. In what way, Venerable Sir, is there right view?" This world, Kachana, for the most part, depends upon a duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. But for one who sees the origin of the world as it really is, with correct wisdom, there is no notion of non-existence in regard to the world. And for one who sees the cessation of the world as it really is, with correct wisdom, there is no notion of existence in regard to the world. This world, Kajana, is for the most part shackled by engagement, clinging, and adherence. But this one with right view does not become engaged and cling through that engagement and clinging. Mental standpoint, adherence, underlying tendency, he does not take a stand upon myself. He has no perplexity or doubt that what arises is only suffering arising. What ceases is only suffering ceasing. His knowledge about this is independent of others. It is in this way, Kachana, that there is right view. All exists, Kachana. This is one extreme. All does not exist. This is the second extreme. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle, with ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness comes to be, and that's through the whole dependent origination sequence. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formations, cessation of consciousness. Such is, and then through the whole sequence, such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. So that the importance of right view and the Buddha tying it to the notion of existence and non-existence, and the word he uses is because oftentimes it's translated like bhava. Bhava and vibhava are say existence and non-existence, but this is a somewhat different word, attita and natita. So it's a little bit more abstract as a word or as a conceiving. So this is why Bhikkhu Bodhis use that sense of the notion of existence, the notion of non-existence, and then when one sees arising, then sort of, all right, well, there's this arising, but then if one pays attention to ceasing, and then we say, well, that sense of being or existence is sort of overshadowed. But that it just depends on what we're viewing, and that's why this sense of right view is stepping back and holding it all in terms of the this dependent origination process. That's nature. That is Dhamma. Dhamma titata, Dhamma niyamata. That sense of these things being following according to nature, the truth. But then also that, of course, he doesn't take a stand on myself. There's without getting caught in that sense of identity and recognizing, seeing things through the light of the phenomenological approach of the Buddhas, where one is seeing, one seeing things. So, say, has no perplexity or doubt that what arises is only suffering arising. What ceases is only suffering ceasing, and again, it's sort of the sense of the whole range of nuance of of stress or dis-ease or discontent, dissatisfaction. That is, and that's where the Buddha points to these different types of suffering. So, I mean, there's the dukkha that is actually dukkha and unsatisfactory. It's uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. I mean, that is, we experience that. But also the sankhara dukkha, just the dukkha of things being of a compounded nature. So then, within that compounded nature, there's always a certain tension or a certain, not peaceful, not totally peaceful, not completely at ease. And then, of course, there's the dukkha of separation. Where something is pleasant, desired, agreeable, but then it inevitably ends. Inevitably, one has to be separated from it. So these different. We're seeing dukkha arising, dukkha ceasing, but then paying attention to that causal process, and in that, that is one's right view, and that's one's experience of the say cessation of dukkha nirodha. Any questions, comments?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that teaching of the Buddhists could be correctly applied to like scenarios where, say, somebody says they saw a ghost, and this idea comes up in my head, like the ghosts don't exist. But the thing is, I've never seen a ghost. I've never seen it arise. It's just, and this is a view arising.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean that's from our especially from a Western modern educated perspective, then if people talk about ghosts, and you just sort of blow it off as sort of it's totally weird. But then, say people from Thailand in particular, or other Asian or traditional cultures, and then ghosts and spirits are just, that isn't an ordinary part of existence. So the problem is not whether there are or there aren't. Say the problem is in as I said, the engagement, the clinging, the adherence to whatever view it is, and how does that? Because usually when there is some kind of clinging, adherence, then one ends up being in conflict or in doubt. So then I mean, that in itself is dukkha. So being able to view things through the lens of dukkha and its cessation, as opposed to, am I right? And of course, if I'm right, that they're wrong. Or I'm wrong and they're right. It's hopeless. And so that taking a stand is fraught with dukkha, and there's a propping up of that notion of existence, or the notion of its non-existence. I think this is why in this sutta the Buddha uses attita and nattita. Bhava is more of a personal existence, personality. Existence in attita and nattita is a bit more broad, a bit more abstract. So then it encompasses more around the transcendent view, world outside, world here, it's a bit more abstract.
With regard to objects, like as well.
Yeah, well.
Is that where returning to the body is so important? You can know this breath, you can know this body.
Yes. I mean, because it's so helpful to stick with the tangible. One, because we're so prone to proliferation of various ways, and getting hooked into projections and projections, proliferations, looking for some kind of, some kind of view, some kind of stand. So then they sort of, attention to the breath, attention to the body is a bit more mundane, tangible, but it's showing one the nature of basically of all phenomena in terms of its impermanence, its unsatisfactoriness, its non-self nature, and then that's also why these Four Noble Truths are so important as a teaching, because it takes one away from the speculation of the world and deities or gods, godheads, whatever. I mean, all of the which can be couched in extremely beautiful and inspiring language, but it also it's also suffering, in the sense of it being dukkha. You've got to prop up those views. So then, coming back to the experiential realm of what does this, what's the feeling of this, what's the experience of this, how's it affecting me? Okay, so on this section on Dukkha Nirodha, this is the last sort of supplementary reading that I thought I would give, and this is the Anguttara 4:45. It's the Rohitassa Sutta, and this is the paying attention to that cessation through knowing within experience. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. Then, when the night had advanced, the young Deva Rohitassa, of stunning beauty, illuminating the entire Jeta's Grove, approached the Blessed One. He paid homage to the Blessed One, stood to one side, and said,
Is it possible, Bhante, by traveling to know, see, or reach the end of the world, where one is not born, does not grow old and die, does not pass away and get reborn? I say, friend, that by traveling one cannot know, see, or reach that end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old and die, does not pass away and get reborn. It is astounding and amazing, Bhante, how well this was stated by the Blessed One. I say, friend, that by traveling one cannot know, see, or reach that end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old and die, does not pass away and get reborn. In the past, Bhante, I was a seer named Rohitasa, son of Boja, one possessing psychic potency, able to travel through the sky. My speed was like that of a light arrow easily shot by a firm-bowed archer, one trained, skilled, and experienced. Across the shadow shot by a firm-bowed archer, across the shadow of a palmyra tree. My stride was such that it could reach from the eastern ocean to the western ocean. Then, while I possessed such speed and such a stride, the wish arose in me. I will reach the end of the world by traveling. Having a lifespan of 100 years, living for 100 years, I traveled for 100 years without pausing, except to eat, drink, chew, and taste, to defecate and urinate, and to dispel fatigue with sleep. Yet I died along the way without having reached the end of the world. It is astounding and amazing, Bhante, how well this was stated by the Blessed One. I say, friend, that by traveling one cannot know, see, or reach the end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old and die, does not pass away and get reborn. I say, friend, that by traveling one cannot know, see, or reach that end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old and die, does not pass away and get reborn. Yet I say that without having reached the end of the world, there is no making an end of suffering. It is in this fathom-long body, endowed with perception and mind, that I proclaim the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the way leading to the cessation of the world. And the sutta ends in verses. The end of the world can never be reached by means of traveling across the world. Yet without reaching the world's end, there is no release from suffering. Hence the wise one, the world knower, who has reached the world's end and lived a spiritual life, having known the world's end, at peace, does not desire this world or another. So that formulation of the world origin of the world, cessation of the world, follows exactly the formulation of the Four Noble Truths, and applies to the world as well as to dukkha. And also that ending, that cessation, or that extinction, isn't found outside, isn't found out in the world somewhere, that there is some perfect place where one can go and be, and it's going to be the end of either the end of the world or the end of dukkha. One has to. That's why the Buddha saying it is in this fathom-long body endowed with perception and mind that I proclaim the world. So that proclaim this truth, so that it's within experience that one returns or directs one's attention And similarly, when we talk of the end of the world, cessation of the world, it's that I brought it up the other day in terms of that translation of the Nirodha as not necessarily referring to like a finite cessation ending, but also it has a equally valid meaning in terms of non-arising or no longer a problem, so that when proclaiming the world, origin of the world, non-arising of the world, and the way leading to the non-arising of the world, or the origin of the world. And they say, the world no longer a problem, and the way leading to the world no longer being a problem. And those are equally kind of valid translations, and because I mean it's just the way language works. We tend to invest absolute meaning into things, and there's some nuance in this word, Nirodha, as a truth of the cessation of dukkha. Any questions on this? This is
actually a sutta that Bhikkhu Bodhi has praised as one of the great
elucidations of truth in terms of a philosophical formulation in human history, it's a great sutta for coming back to and contemplating, reflecting.
I don't remember Bhikkhu Bodhi's exact wording, but I was a little struck by the phrase, the mind fixes upon Nibbana.
Pardon?
I thought in the first reading, Bhikkhu Bodhi had a phrasing something along the lines of the mind fixes upon Nibbana, and I was a little bit struck by that because I never heard of, maybe I just missed it, I wasn't sure what was meant by that.
Let's take a quick look. Well, certainly there are suttas where the Buddha talks of the mind inclining to Nibbana, and there's a variety of verb forms that are talked about. But I don't. I'm looking somewhat quickly, but I'm not seeing him phrasing it as fixing on Nibbana.
Yeah, I might have misheard it, but then.
Oh, yes, here it is, yeah.
Nibbana cannot be perceived by those who live in lust and hate, but it can be seen with the arising of spiritual vision, and by fixing the mind upon it in the depths of meditation, and the disciple can attain the destruction of the taints, which fixing on it is maybe one way of saying it, but it's also what comes to mind is say in the 10 anusattis, recollections, Upasamano sati is recollection of peace, and recollection of peace is the peace of Nibbana, so that one is lifting that up and directing one's attention to it, so that I mean, I can see it as a very, I mean, of course, it's an approximation. One's not going to actually, because Nibbana isn't a thing, but it is, but it is a way of inspiring the mind, encouraging the mind. And that's where, recollections of the peace of Nibbana, recollection of, because even in terms of meditation, just that recollection of cessation, nirodha satcha, because we're really good at focusing our attention on the arising of dukkha. There's me suffering again, and we get that really quickly. We can explore that really well, but to actually attend to ceasing, ending, the mind that is not entangled with dukkha. I mean, if in reality, if we were entangled in dukkha for 24/7 for infinite amount of time, they'd have to lock us away. I mean, but it's, the reality is we do experience that. It's not, and to even the ordinary bits of dukkha's not there, right? Because it's not what we tend to be drawn to. So it's I think it's helpful to bring that up as a possibility, as a kind of alternative directing of attention.
Could the breakthrough moment be rephrased as like realizing the cessation of phenomena as well as fully realizing the non-arising of phenomena?
Yeah. Because sometimes sometimes that it's helpful to use language to encourage us rather than trying to box ourselves into the assumed reality of concepts and language. And particularly, cessation has
benefits and it has drawbacks. In the same way, say, like concentration, the word concentration for samadhi has, there's a validity there, but it's also, it has a certain fraught connotation also.
Oh, related to the Sayu's question, that is, I get hung up. I've been experiencing not a cessation of dukkha, but focusing on contact and really trying to ensure through mindfulness the non-arising of the dukkha. Mm-hmm. And I find that quicker, just simply focusing on the contact. Is that a way? Well, I think, because I don't want the dukkha to arise, so if I can get it, and it's not a technique, it's just more of really being mindful and seeing that, knowing whether the mind's going to proliferate on something, or knowing if you're going to touch something, what that's going to bring up, keep it from arising, and then dukkha doesn't come up in certain circumstances.
Yeah, you have to use it as a reflective device, say, as opposed to an obsessive forcing the mind on
object thought out experience. But that's that. Having said that, and having that balance, where one is able to attend to. Again, that's where I say that mindfulness of the body is so helpful, because that tangible nature, and one gets to see, say, like arising and ceasing on a, on a very tangible level, and then being able to pay attention to, well, what is one then investing in from there, because we can invest a whole lot into something that's coming in to be some reaction. We can invest into the non-arising. Okay, now I got non-arising down. So it's that, but it is that taking. That's where in terms of meditation, and mindfulness, it's just helpful to have an object. It helps to clarify what the mind is doing.